This is the story of Kevin Marlowe and his wife Rachel Marlowe. They had built something most people would call a good life. A house with a porch they rarely sat on, two incomes that left room for small luxuries, and a marriage that had settled into the kind of quiet that can mean either contentment or erosion, depending on the light. Kevin had always believed that stability was its own form of love, that showing up reliably, day after day, was the most honest thing a man could offer. Rachel had believed this too, once. What neither of them had examined closely enough was the difference between being present and being seen, and how long a person could survive on the former before beginning, almost unconsciously, to reach for the latter. This is a story about the slow leak in a well-built thing, about the choices people make when they confuse hunger for love and certainty for safety. The Tuesday ritual went like this. Kevin made coffee before Rachel was awake, set her mug on the left side of the counter where she'd find it, and by the time she came downstairs in her robe, hair still pressed flat on one side, he was already reading on his tablet. One leg crossed over the other. She'd say morning, and he'd say morning back, and they would exist in the kitchen together for 20 minutes without it feeling like anything was wrong. Because nothing was wrong. That was the precise and confounding truth of it. They had been married 11 years. Kevin was 41, a structural engineer who found genuine satisfaction in load calculations and material tolerances. His pleasures were modest and reliable. Weekend runs, a particular brand of dark roast, college football in the fall. He was not a cold man. He was, more accurately, a man who had learned early that emotion without function was noise, and had organized his inner life accordingly. He loved Rachel in the way he trusted a well-drawn blueprint, completely, and without feeling the need to keep checking. Rachel was 38. She worked in marketing for a mid-size architecture firm, a job she'd taken 4 years ago after leaving a larger agency that had burned her out. She was good at reading rooms, good at language, good at making people feel that their ideas were worth something. At home, these skills often went unused, not because Kevin dismissed her, he didn't, but because their home life didn't require them. It required other things: scheduling, bill management, dinner logistics. She provided these things. So did he. It was a functional partnership, and function, she had begun to notice, had a way of quietly crowding out everything else. The co-worker's name was Daniel Price. He was 34, a copywriter who joined the firm 8 months earlier. Rachel had mentioned him casually at first. The new guy, then Daniel, then just references to things he'd said in meetings, ideas he'd had. The way he argued for creative risks that the account managers usually shot down. Kevin had listened without concern. He trusted Rachel without effort. This was one of his virtues. It may also have been one of his failures. The first indication, not of anything definitive, but of something, came on a Saturday in early October. They were at the kitchen table, eating takeout Thai, and Rachel was telling him about a campaign pitch she and Daniel had worked on late into the previous evening. Her face had a particular quality as she talked, animated in a way Kevin associated with her earlier self, with the version of Rachel who used to argue about films until midnight or describe a stranger's behavior with funny, precise cruelty. He watched her without commenting on it. He ate his noodles and asked a follow-up question about the campaign's budget, and she answered it, and the animation faded, and they ate the rest of the meal in comfortable quiet. Later that night, he lay beside her in the dark and thought, briefly, that she had seemed happy today. The thought came and went without alarm. He was glad she was happy. He closed his eyes. He did not ask himself why, or about what, or with whom, because Kevin Marlowe did not treat his own perceptions as data points unless there was a pattern, and patterns require time, and he was a patient man. He was also, though he wouldn't have used this word, a man who had grown accustomed to not looking too closely at the things he trusted most. Not from fear, from something more like certainty. He had built the load-bearing walls of his life carefully, and he believed in the integrity of his materials. That belief was, in the truest and most ordinary sense, the beginning of everything that followed. November came in gray and close. The late nights began, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the gradual way that real things tend to happen. A Tuesday here, a Thursday there. Rachel would text from the office, campaign deadline pushed, don't wait up. Kevin would reheat his portion, leave hers covered on the stove, and spend the evening the way he spent most evenings, reading, watching something on television, thinking about a problem at work. When she came home, she'd be tired in a specific, lit-up way, the kind of tired that follows something that mattered. She'd shower, slide into bed, and if he was still awake, they'd exchange a few sentences that touched nothing. He noticed. He filed it. What Kevin could not have articulated, because he lacked the vocabulary and also the habit of introspection that would have made it accessible, was that he and Rachel had not had a conversation with genuine friction in nearly 2 years. Not an argument. They still had those, low-grade and logistical, but friction in the way of actual contact, of two minds pressing against each other and leaving a mark. He didn't know he missed it. He would have said, if asked, that he appreciated the peace. Rachel, for her part, was not lying to herself entirely. She knew what she felt around Daniel was not nothing. She also told herself with some honesty that feelings were not actions, and that what she felt was more about what she wasn't getting than about what he specifically offered. Daniel listened to her differently than Kevin did. He asked follow-up questions about her thoughts, not her plans. He laughed when she was funny in the oblique, self-deprecating way that Kevin usually let pass. This was not, she knew, a sufficient reason for anything. It was also, she was beginning to understand, not nothing. One evening in mid-November, she came home to find Kevin at his desk, sketching something on graph paper. He looked up and said, "Hey," and she said, "Hey," and she put her bag down and stood in the doorway of his study for a moment, watching him return to his work, and felt a loneliness so specific and so familiar that it almost felt like furniture. "Do you ever feel like we're just," she started, and then stopped. He looked up again. "Just what?" "Running parallel, like we're next to each other, but not." She made a gesture with her hand that she couldn't translate. He put the pencil down. This was something he did when he was taking her seriously. He removed the thing in his hands. She had always noticed this, and, in early years, found it touching. "That's not new," he said. "Is it?" "No," she admitted. "I guess not." "Is something wrong?" She looked at him. There was genuine attention in his face. The careful, architectural attention he gave to things he was trying to assess structurally. She felt, without quite knowing why, that she could not reach him from where she was standing. "I don't know," she said. "I'm tired." And then, after a pause, "Sometimes I think, I don't know, maybe like this story or subscribe or something." Kevin's expression shifted. "What?" She blinked. Something had passed over her face, a flicker of awareness of something she couldn't name. "Nothing," she said. "Forget it. I'm going to make tea." He watched her leave the doorway. He sat with the pencil in his hand and the graph paper in front of him and thought. Something is wrong, which was not the same thought he would have had a month ago, and was therefore a kind of movement. He didn't follow her to the kitchen. He returned to his drawing. He was a man who believed in accumulating evidence before drawing conclusions, and he did not yet have enough. But he was beginning to look. In the 3 weeks that followed, Kevin did a thing that was unlike him and also, given who he was, entirely predictable. He became systematic. He tracked the patterns without saying so. He noticed that the late nights clustered around 2 to 3 times per week, that Rachel's phone now rested screen down on surfaces rather than face up, that she had started running on Saturday mornings, a habit she'd never previously kept. He told himself these were observations, not conclusions. He did not snoop. He did not check her phone. He considered it once, standing in the bathroom while she was in the shower, her phone on the vanity, and found that he could not do it, not from passivity, but from something more like professional ethics applied to the wrong context. He believed in doing things properly or not doing them at all. So he called, instead, a private investigator named Walt Greer, whom he found through a former colleague and vetted carefully before making contact. He described the situation in flat, precise language. He said, "I want to know what I'm dealing with before I respond to it." Walt Greer, who had spent 30 years learning that the most controlled clients were often the ones who fell apart latest and hardest, said he understood. Walt Greer delivered a manila envelope on a Thursday morning, 12 days after Kevin had retained him. Kevin did not open it at work. He drove home, sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water, and read through the contents methodically. Photographs, a summary log, timestamps. Nothing in the photographs was explicit. There were 2 images of Rachel and a man Kevin recognized from her phone's camera roll, tall, dark-haired, younger, outside a restaurant on a Tuesday evening. One image of them standing close on a sidewalk. One of a car parked outside an apartment building on the east side. Rachel's license plate confirmed. 11:48 p.m. to 2015 a.m. Kevin sat with this for a long time. What he felt was not what he would have predicted. There was pain, of course there was. But it arrived quietly, without theater, like water finding a low point in a floor. Beneath it was something else, a deep, clarifying anger, not at Rachel's feelings for someone else, at the specific fact of being managed, of being handled, of her deciding, on his behalf, what he was allowed to know about his own life. Rachel came home at 6:30 that evening, normal time. She found him in the living room, seated on the couch, the television off. The envelope was on the coffee table. She stopped walking. "Sit down," he said, not harshly. She sat in the armchair across from him. She looked at the envelope and looked at him, and he watched her do the calculation in real time. How much does he know? How did he get it? How do I approach this? How long? He asked. She started to speak and stopped. It depends what you mean by Rachel. She looked at her hands. Nothing physical happened until about 6 weeks ago. Before that, it was just. She stopped again. Just what? Just talking. And I know how that sounds. It sounds accurate, he said. She looked up at him. She had expected something louder. She wasn't sure what to do with this precise, measured version of his grief. Kevin, I wasn't trying to blow up our marriage. I want you to know that. I believe you, he said. That's actually the part that interests me most. She flinched slightly. What does that mean? It means I don't think you're a person who makes reckless decisions. I think you made a calculated one. I think you decided that what you were getting from someone else was worth the risk, and you managed the situation to protect yourself while you figured out what you wanted. He said this without accusation in his voice, which was worse, somehow, than if he'd shouted. I want to know, do you love him? A long pause. I don't know, do you love me? Another pause. Yes, but I don't know if I don't know if it's the same kind of. She stopped herself. The same kind of enough, he finished. She didn't deny it. Kevin leaned forward and set his hands on his knees. I'm going to stay at my brother's for a while. Not because I need space to be dramatic about it, because I need to think clearly, and I can't do that here. Kevin, I'm not ending anything tonight, he said. I'm not making any permanent decisions in the next 4 hours, but I need you to understand that I know now what the actual situation is, and I can't unknow it. He stood, went to the bedroom, packed a bag with the efficiency of someone who had, without meaning to, been half prepared for this. When he came back through the living room, Rachel was still in the armchair, her arms folded across her chest, not crying, but close to it. I'm sorry, she said. He paused at the door. I know you are, he said. I'm not sure it changes the math. He left. The door clicked shut behind him, which was somehow worse than if it had slammed. The months that followed did what months do. They rearranged things without announcing themselves. Kevin stayed at his brother Marcus's house for 3 weeks, then rented a furnished apartment on the other side of the city. He hired a lawyer, not aggressively, but deliberately, the way he did everything, and initiated separation proceedings. He went to work. He ran. He cooked for himself, which he discovered he was better at than he remembered, because for most of the marriage Rachel had preferred to cook, and he let her. He called his mother every Sunday. He was not destroyed. This surprised people who knew him. His colleague Davis, who'd gone through his own divorce 4 years earlier in a spectacular spiral. expected Kevin to come apart in some visible way, and was confused when he didn't. What Davis couldn't see, what most people around Kevin couldn't see, was that the coming apart was happening at a depth that didn't show in behavior. Kevin was a man who processed things at a structural level. He was dismantling his understanding of 11 years and reassessing every load-bearing element. It was thorough and slow and devastating and invisible. He did not call Rachel. She called him twice in the first month. He answered both times, kept the conversations factual, logistics, shared accounts, the car insurance they'd bundled. He was not unkind. He was not warm. Daniel Price, as it turned out, was not prepared for the real weight of Rachel. She discovered this incrementally, the way you find out about structural problems in a house you've purchased. Not all at once, but in the way small things reveal a pattern. He was attentive in the context of meetings, of late-night work sessions, of being the man in contrast to an absent husband. In the context of being the actual available choice, he grew vague. He hadn't ended his own complicated situation. A girlfriend of 3 years he had omitted from early conversations. By February, Rachel and Daniel had arrived at a cold, mutual unspeaking, neither of them willing to name the thing that had ended between them, because doing so would require examining it honestly. Rachel told herself the expected things, that her marriage had been emotionally barren for years, that Kevin's steadiness was a kind of withholding, that she'd reached for something real and found it, only for the circumstances to collapse around her. These were not entirely lies. They were the truth arranged to minimize her own agency, to cast her as a person things happened to rather than a person who chose. She was intelligent enough to know she was doing this. She did it anyway. It was the only way to get through the mornings. She kept the house. She went to work. She had dinner with her friend Claire once a week, and Claire asked careful questions and listened, and Rachel described her marriage in terms that were accurate but selective, and Claire made sympathetic sounds, and they ordered another glass of wine, and Rachel drove home to the house with a porch they'd rarely sat on and stood in the kitchen for a while without knowing why she'd stopped moving. She missed Kevin in ways she hadn't expected. Not the early romantic Kevin. That man had become this man so gradually she hadn't noticed. But the specific, unglamorous texture of him, the way he set the coffee out every morning, the particular quality of his attention when something was actually wrong, as opposed to his ordinary half-presence. She'd spent so long being irritated by his steadiness that she hadn't noticed how much she'd relied on it. It was March when she finally admitted to herself, sitting alone in a restaurant where she'd meant to meet Claire but had arrived too early, that she had not been driven to Daniel by desperation or emotional starvation alone. She had also been bored, and boredom felt insufficient, too small and too selfish a word, for the wreckage it had produced. She turned it over and put it down and picked up her phone and put that down too. There was nothing she could do with the recognition except hold it. Kevin, in his apartment, was reading. He was also, slowly, becoming a slightly different version of himself, one who had started seeing a therapist, not because he believed in it exactly, but because he was a man who believed in consulting experts. The therapist's name was Dr. Abra Voss, and she was patient and difficult in equal measure, and she had a way of asking questions that made Kevin have to sit very still. She asked him once whether his certainty, his fundamental bedrock certainty, had ever felt like a kind of armor. He thought about it for a long time. Probably, he said. Who were you protecting? He thought about it longer. I'm not sure. He ran into Rachel's car in a pharmacy parking lot in late March. Her car, not Rachel. He didn't see her until he'd already noticed the license plate and looked up. She was coming out of the pharmacy with a small bag, and she stopped when she saw him, and he stopped, and they stood 10 feet apart in the gray afternoon light, looking at each other. Hey, she said. Hey, he said. There was a pause in which both of them assembled something like composure. How are you? She asked. Fine, he said. And then, more honestly, getting there. She nodded. She looked like herself, and also like someone who'd been carrying something for a long time. He looked like himself, and also like someone who'd put something down. Kevin, she started. We don't have to, he said, not coldly. She nodded. He nodded back. He walked to his car. It was not yet the ending, but it was the shape of it, becoming visible. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday in April, which Kevin had not expected to feel like anything in particular, and which felt, in fact, like stepping off a last stair in the dark, not falling, but the body braced for ground that arrived sooner than anticipated. He had requested one final meeting, in person, not over email. Rachel had agreed. They met at a coffee shop on a neutral block, neither too close to where she lived, nor to where he did. He arrived first, got a table by the window, ordered a black coffee. She arrived 7 minutes later, which had always been her pattern, not late enough to be inconsiderate, not early enough to be anxious. He had always found this quietly charming and had never said so. She ordered a tea. She sat down across from him. They looked at each other in the way that two people do when they've used up most of the available words and know it. "I wanted to do this in person," he said, "because I think I owe you that." "You don't owe me anything," she said, and meant it. "I've been thinking about what happened," he said. "Not about what you did, about what we did, both of us, for a long time." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "Okay." "I was never absent," he said slowly. "I want you to know I know that. I showed up. I did the things. But I think there's a difference between being a reliable person and being a person who's there, and I was one and not always the other." He paused. "I don't say that to absolve anything. I say it because I've been spending a lot of time trying to understand accurately, not charitably. Accurately." Rachel looked at him. This was one of the things she had lost that she hadn't been able to explain to anyone. This quality of his. The careful rigor of it. The way he refused to be imprecise, even when imprecision would have been easier. "I wasn't fair to you," she said. "I want you to know I know that. I made a decision, and then I managed you, and that was worse than the thing itself." "Yes," he said simply. A silence settled between them that wasn't uncomfortable. Exactly. It was the silence of two people who had arrived somewhere true. "I'm not asking for anything," she said. "I just want to know if you—" She stopped. "Try it again. Are you going to be okay?" He considered the question the way he considered everything, seriously, without rushing. "Yes," he said. "Not yet, but yes." She nodded. She looked out the window for a moment. Outside, someone was walking a dog that kept stopping to investigate the base of a parking meter. And its owner was patient about it, giving the leash slack. "I used to think," Rachel said mostly to the window, "that the feeling I was missing was passion, or excitement, or something. And I'm not sure anymore that's what it was." She turned back to him. "I think I just wanted to feel like a priority, and I think I could have told you that, and I didn't, and that's mine to carry." Kevin looked at her. He did not tell her she was wrong, because she wasn't. He did not tell her he wished she had said it, because the wish felt beside the point now. What he felt was something he didn't have a precise word for. A sadness that wasn't angry. A recognition that wasn't forgiving. Exactly, but that had given up its need to punish. "I know," he said. They finished their drinks. They talked briefly about a shared tax matter that still needed resolution, gave each other the names of their respective accountants, and the conversation settled into the logistics. And the logistics were a kind of mercy. When they stood to leave, they stood on opposite sides of the table, and there was a moment where another version of the story might have offered an embrace, or a final declaration, or some gesture large enough to match the weight of 11 years. Instead, Kevin picked up his jacket. Rachel picked up her bag. They walked to the door, and he held it open, which he had always done, and she passed through it, and they stood briefly on the sidewalk in the spring air. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too," she said. She turned and walked in one direction. He turned and walked in the other. He did not look back, not from coldness, but because he had learned in the past year that looking backward while walking forward was how you lost your footing. He kept his eyes on the street ahead, on the ordinary Tuesday morning of it, a delivery truck idling, a woman talking on her phone, two pigeons quarreling over something near a drain. He thought about what Dr. Voss had said in their last session. that grief and clarity were not opposites, that you could know a thing completely and still feel the full weight of having lost it. He thought about the coffee he used to set on the left side of the counter. He thought about the porch they had rarely sat on. He kept walking. Some marriages do not end with a revelation. Some end with the slow, honest recognition of what was always there. The places where two people almost reached each other, and the long accumulation of moments when they chose not to try. Kevin Marlowe did not become a harder man. He became, eventually, a more honest one. Rachel Marlowe did not become a villain in her own story. She became a woman who understood too late the cost of mistaking comfort for indifference and silence for peace. Neither of them was wrong about everything. Neither was right enough. That is the particular cruelty of most true things.